All around the world, there are locations that are off limits to the general public, like a staircase roped off to those unworthy of ascending. My fascination with places like these started off as a hobby. Finding local sites that were fenced off, marked no trespassing, breaking into abandoned amusement parks at night, trekking through federal reserves cordoned off to wandering spectators. The adrenaline rush of being somewhere I wasn't supposed to be far outweighed any motivation to do anything reckless while in these places. Thus, my associates and I were more than respectable and polite while also being criminally invasive. It didn't become a viable source of income until I was hired to find a series of abandoned mining shafts for a venture capitalist, bursting with spendable cash and looking for some buried treasure. We didn't find anything. The magic of these places lies not in what you find or what you can steal, but rather in the mystery of what could have been there. What went on in these places before your virgin senses had taken the surroundings and monuments of identity these places had to offer. It was about nostalgia, not criminality. But one place did have something, an evil that was real. And I am here to tell you about what I found 6 years ago. I am not going to give you the exact location, for reasons that will become obvious later. I will tell you that it was in a European country heavily affected by both world wars. I was hired by a man, I think. I have never met them, whoever they are. I have never seen them in person or even a picture. They call themselves Harrison. Everything was done through dead drops and shady dealings over the phone, through which they first reminded me of a settlement I had heard of called Remoit. Remoit, as far as I knew it, was a fabled war relic, shrouded in mystery. Something that wasn't real from things that I could compare the stories to. Even the most haunted or history-filled places I had found and explored proved to be nothing more than full of embellished stories. Remoit was not. Remoit was supposed to be inhabited by a group of radioactive cannibals. I had also heard New Age necromancers that kidnapped hikers and tourists, turning them into an undead army. Even a theory that the residents were given immortal life in order to guard an enormous buried treasure of Nazi gold. None of these were true. The truth was far worse. I had 24 hours to prepare, and then I was picked up by some very official-looking men in a black SUV. We drove for about 3 hours and then we stopped on the shoulder of the road. The two men pointed to the gravel path that led into some woods. I got out of the car, pulled out my GPS device, and I began to plan a route through the trees using the path. One of the men handed me a gas mask as my GPS loaded what looked like a segmented aerial snapshot, with large swaths of land blurred out and certain coordinates not registering on the device. The men got back in the car as I was waiting at the path entrance, and they drove off in the opposite direction that we had came. I figured that I was on my own. I followed the gravel path for about 1,000 meters when it came to an abrupt end. I thought that was weird, so I pulled up the GPS's map to find out where to go from here, but it was of no use. I pulled out my compass and the needle swung wildly in all directions. I could still faintly see the road behind me, as the forest cut out most of the light from the afternoon sky. Looking from what I could see on the ground, it looked like a sparsely used path was apparent on my left, with a clear path through the trees on the right. I looked back and forth and I settled on the left, as I was going where few had traveled willingly before. The path was crowded with overgrowth, and I lost the trail a couple of times, eventually coming out into a barren field. The grass was brownish green, and the landscape was pockmarked with fairly large holes, and trenches that had been taken over by the weak vegetation. This was some kind of battlefield. I knew of the dangers of unexploded munitions and forgotten landmines, so I carefully made my way across to the farther tree line. After safely making it across, I stopped for a quick breather, to check if my GPS was working again, since I had a clear view of the sky now. When I loaded the program, It cut out after only a few seconds and sent me back to the main menu. I sat there unable to get the map to load, to find my coordinates and to make sure that I was heading in the right direction. I was technically lost, but I wasn't ready to admit that to myself. And that's when I noticed the markings. Arrows pointing deeper into the woods, simply informing me to continue on with my journey. The arrows showed the path pretty clearly, but as I went deeper into the forest, the harder it became to breathe. And then I could see a noticeable drop-off in plant life, the sunlight poking through the permanently decaying canopy. I took the gas mask that the men had given me before they left, and I put it on. It made it easier to breathe, but it added a sense of vulnerability with my vision and hearing dulled. I continued walking, following the arrows, marching like a good little soldier. The feeling of adventure had waned throughout the trek, and for the first time, a feeling of survival and fear washed over me. And that's when I saw a man tied to a tree. I stopped and wondered if it were real, as I hadn't seen any living creatures save for a few flies and mosquitoes thus far. No birds chirping, no rodents scurrying on the forest floor. This area was supposed to be void of all life, hence why it was restricted. I thought then that he must have been kidnapped, so I approached the man. "Hello," he said rather cheery. "Are you alright?" I asked. "Well, why wouldn't I be?" he said rather confused. His face had this twisted smile, but it was dark. It felt dark. "Mate, you're strapped to a tree. You have barely got any clothes on." "We're just fine, boy." His voice slid with spite. His smile dropped and there was no expression on his face. "Would you like me to untie?" I began. I said we're fine, boy. His voice echoed with a guttural undertone. The trees felt like they were shaking in fear. The sound hollowed out inside of my gas mask as I watched his smile return. "March on. The devil's on the other ridge," he said. Devil? I thought to myself. This couldn't be right. The fantasy in these places was never real. It was all just hype. But who was this man and what was going on? It appeared that he didn't want to help. I shuffled back away from the man, stumbling over a tree root and falling into a tree behind him. I felt a pair of hands catch me. "There you go," said this crimson voice, its syllables slithering into my ear. I turned and looked to see a woman chained to a tree. Her legs were wrapped tightly with a rope that wound around the trunk. The rope was so tight that it had cut off circulation so badly that her legs looked dead and bloated. The wounds looked old, as if she may have been suffering there for years. "Get up," she said. "Get up," said the man. "Get up, get up, get up." They alternated. I stood and frantically tried to regain balance and move further into the woods. Within a few feet, I saw a young boy chained and gagged to the tree. A swastika was carved into his forehead, and the blood dried. I ran up to him and I grabbed the chains, trying to pull them off of him and get him down. "You're gonna be okay," I said to the boy. I took off the gas mask and I put it on his face. "We're gonna get you out of here and back to your family, and I'm going to tell Harrison that he can shove that money up his ass." The boy was unresponsive, but his eyes were open. I found a large padlock behind him. All of the chains passed through it, but there was no way to break it. As I came back around the tree, I found the gas mask on the ground. I looked back at the boy's face. His eyes were a soft gray color. As I approached, I could see something moving around behind his eye. I got closer and I saw that it was a small gray worm that had burrowed deep into his head. "Get it out," he moaned as I jumped back, falling to the ground again. "What the hell? What the hell?" I mumbled as I tried to stand up. I began to run, slowly noticing the bodies tied and bound to trees all around me. hundreds of them, moaning and crying. Some were laughing, some were singing, some repeating mantras and praying. Men, women, children, grandparents, aunts and uncles, friends and family, all appearing as if their bodies had been in these woods for many, many years. I turned in between two large trees where two men had been tied together, the flesh of their skulls sewed so that they appeared to be a vertical mirrored image of each other. One was crying and one was laughing. The laughing man was on the bottom, and his voice sounded like there were a handful of stones in his throat. I kept running. At this point, the yellow fog had gotten thicker, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to breathe. I collapsed to my hands and knees, the burning fire in my chest, the pain behind my eyes. My blood felt as if it were boiling. I crawled as far as my arms would take me, and then the air cleared. It was a miracle. I had made it out to the clearing and I crawled out into the field, heaving lungfuls of clean air. It felt like a spot of heaven in what surely was hell on earth. That was until I looked up. Thousands of bodies tied to trees, all alive and well. They looked at me. All were silent. And then in unison, they all proceeded to open their mouth. The high-pitched whirring sound started to pound in my skull. I clawed at my brain, needing to arrest the pain of the pitch. And that's when I passed out. When I came to, I was inside of a small room. It was a log cabin or some old house of sorts. A fireplace was crackling as I sat up in the bed. The room was dark except for the light from the fire. A faint glow came through the dirty windows. A thin gray smoke poured from under the door. In the chair next to me was my gas mask. I stood up, dizzy and dazed but destined to do my duty. I felt this burning desire to serve something bigger than myself. I donned the gas mask and I opened the door. I could hear faint gunshots as quieted explosions lit up my horizon. I could see the bodies, stacked and bleeding, lining the ground. Bullet casings, dirt and shrapnel dressed the dead, as their bodies pointed the way through the battlefield. I walked as fast as I could, which was limited to a slow trudge, all while seeing the outline of a large beast in the shadows across the field, and bursts of light in the midst of large explosions. The silhouette appeared to follow me as I made my way across the scene of carnage. Bodies lined every inch of my path, some brutally slain, while others held on to life with bloodied hands. The silhouette grew larger as I approached it, and then it began to speak. An unearthly sound rang out over the muted waging of war around me.
Have you come to know the true face of hell?
I stopped dead in my tracks, feeling the bass of his voice shake my mortal bones. What is this place? I asked.
This, the very meaning of pain and evil. A place where hell has split out under the earth.
Am I dead? I asked.
Do you wish to be?
I remained silent. What do you want with me? I asked.
You have come in search of what horror truly is, have you not?
I came to find a town, a settlement, Rimoit. The beast is silent as he is partially illuminated by a nearby explosion. Blood splatters across his lower abdomen, his face hidden in smoke and shadows.
Then go.
That's when I woke up in the field, the yellow fog sitting at the edge of the trees. I stood up with what strength that I had and I turned to face the thousands of bodies. But nothing was there. No bodies, just empty dying trees. I decided that I had had enough and I wanted to leave and quickly. I started walking in whatever direction I could, eventually coming to a road. After a few minutes of walking, a black SUV pulled up behind me, and one of the gentlemen who had dropped me off stepped out. Are you ready? He asked me. For what? I asked, still dazed. He handed me a cell phone. Hello? I said as I put it up to my ear. It was Harrison. He asked if I had found Rymoid. I told him that I had failed. Did you see the beast? He asked. I was stunned. And the smoke, I thought that was a dream. I said. That was no dream. That was a true doorway to hell. A portal that was opened when the blood of those soldiers was shed. I was at a total loss for words. And then I asked. So now what? You're alive and you have a connection to it now. We would like to know how that works. I looked back at the two men, as one was approaching with an extended metal baton. Okay, I yelled as I dropped the phone. Okay, I put my hands up in surrender. Just don't hurt me. I've been through. And then it was lights out. Blackness and the smell of petrol flooded my senses. I began to freak out, feeling that my hands and feet were bound behind me. I could hear the splashing of the fuel in a canister next to my head. There was no other sound in the vehicle, which was noticeably moving quite quickly. All of a sudden, the vehicle began to slow, and then it took a sharp left. After a few minutes, we came to a halt. I heard the doors open, and then I was dragged from the back, slamming hard onto the dry earth. The cloth was lifted from my head. The setting sun gleamed bright into my eyes. I looked up at the man holding my former hood, as he threw it to the side and picked up the petrol can, unscrewing it and then dousing me with the fuel. No, please, God, no! I cried. The man looked down at me with a callous face. Please don't kill me! I screamed. One of the other men kicked my spine hard. Shut up, you'll be fine. The man set down the petrol can and struck a flip lighter. Or maybe you won't. And then he lit me on fire. When you die, I can say this, the light is really a thing, but it's basically just a giant synapse firing in slow motion, and then you're dragged through what feels like an ethereal water slide. When I reached the end, I was standing next to my smoldering body, watching the men as they stood and watched me burn to a crisp. I backed away stunned, holding my mouth, but all that came out was silence. I fell to the ground and I stared at the men who began to set up camp like nothing had happened. I was so angry. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I screamed in anger of not being able to scream, but nothing was heard. I began to look around to see if I could get their attention. I threw stones, but the stones would just reset themselves to where they were before I touched them. Nothing was working. And that's when I noticed the fire and smoke pouring over the tree line in the distance. One of the men knelt down next to my body, which was now a curled up clump of blackened carbon. Go find the boy. Find Rymoid. Find the boy. He stood up and he backed away. No one touched my body, they all just left it there out in the open. I wiped my tears from my face and I stood up, walking towards the large plume, leaving my charred corpse crackling behind me. As I pushed through the forest line, expecting to see more bodies and yellow gas clouds blocking my path, I came upon another small cabin. A man was sitting outside next to a small campfire. He appeared to be sharpening a bayonet, looking out over the beginning of the battlefield. From there, the field was blocked by a thick wall of gray smoke. I walked up behind the man and I called out, "Hello, sir?" He didn't turn around. "Sir, can you hear me?" He stopped sharpening his blade and he turned in my direction. His face was dirty, covered in blood and ash. I saw bursts of flame erupt from behind him through the veil of smoke, lighting up a small portion of the battle raging on the other side. As I got closer, I saw that his eyes were gone. Empty sockets dripped dry blood as the small black void stared deep into my chest. "Who's that?" the man asked. "I am here to find Rymoid," I said. The man looked confused. Well, unless you plan to pull it from the ashes of blood and earth, Rymoy belongs to no man's land now. I stood silent. Tell me your name, soldier, he asked. The only word that popped into my mind was petrol. Peter, I said. A doughboy, eh? Come to fight the beast. You've seen it too? The Germans, you can't miss them. At least until they take your eyes. And then you hear them all the time. The man goes back to sharpening his bayonet. Plotting to kill me and my men. All of them. Sir? What are your orders, soldier? Shouted the man with military reverie. I must find Rymoy, I say. Then your new home is the front of the line. Two more large beasts illuminate the gray veil. Rymoy was a small farmer's village, destroyed by the onslaught of endless war. No more bearing did it have on a map than to serve as the front line, the intermediary drawn between life and all else. So I must head to the front line. Which way is that? The man turned to the wall of smoke and pointed. In there. Can I ask you one thing before I leave? What is with the bodies? You know, the ones tied to the trees around the battlefield. The man turned around to me and stared. What bodies? I was confused, but nevertheless, I prepared to press forward. The smoke was thick, but I had no trouble breathing this time. As I took my first few steps into the thickened mud, I could see the outline of what looked like a horse ahead of me. I approached it and saw that it was emaciated and bloodied. And then I noticed the cannonball-sized hole that had ripped through its side. A large barreled artillery gun was stationed behind it. Each shot let loose in silent horror as it repeatedly ripped through the horse again and again. I continued walking forward, the mud getting thicker and darker with each step. My feet laid out before me a shallow path of crimson blood and blackened sludge. Organs, intestines, limbs littered the ground as I attempted to step over them. A face looked up at me from the mud, with tears and blood running from its eyes. To my right was the start of a long trench. A man dressed in a period uniform ran up and out of the trench only to be shot through his head, his body sliding back down the trench wall to a steady rest. And then he rose again, gun in hand, and he charged the front line, repeating his sudden demise, and slipping back down to his soiled study, where he would plan his attack once more and forever. These beings were trapped there, in a constant hell with constant death, surrounding their every thought and every emotion. A man sat on the edge of a steep wall, crying as he stared at a picture held in his trembling hands. A portion of his chest bellowed out, the bullet piercing through, covering his hands in blood, the picture dripping with his eternal liquid breath. I didn't understand where I was, and I didn't really understand how I got there, but I had no choice. I had to press forward, and it helped that I couldn't feel much of anything. A trench opened up in front of me, and I worked my way through stacks of bodies, weaving around blind corners. I came to a dead end. As I turned to trek in another direction, the ground opened up before me, and my momentum carrying me down. I fell into what felt like a shallow pond, and then I felt a hand move across my chest, and then another. I wiped the sludge from my eyes, and I looked to see I was swimming in a flooded bunker, filled with blood and bodies. More hands began to grab onto me and started pulling me under the surface. I fought back with what little strength that I had, but the blood-laden sludge filled my mouth and nose, causing me to choke. As I splashed and struggled to reach the surface, I felt a hand come down from above. I reached for it, feeling that it was small but it was strong. And then another hand, and then another. The tiny hands were lifting me out, but something in the blood wanted me too. There I was, stretched between my burdened freedom and eternal torture. The tiny hands pulled with one last bout of strength, and I was spat out like an unsolicited chicken bone. My face sank into the mud, filling my mouth with more visceral and thickened earth. I stood to find that I was alone, merely surrounded by more damned, trapped souls. I pulled myself out of the trench and up into the fray. I could feel bullets reeling past my head. The sound slowed to the effect that it began to sound like a deep laughter with each rotation of the round. There before me, I could see a small cottage, misplaced amongst the raging war. A small boy was playing outside, seemingly unaffected by the surrounding carnage. I approached him slowly. "Excuse me, young man. I am looking for Rymoit. Can you tell me if I found it?" The boy looked at me and said, "Oh, you must speak with my father. Rymoit is our surname and this is our farm. Can I fetch you some fresh cream?" "Sure," I said. "Thank you very much." "Harrison, who are you talking to?" "A nice German officer, Papa. He has heard about the land." A tall man emerges from inside of the shallow cottage. "I am no German officer," I say. The man turns towards me. "I told you that I would never give you my land. You'll have to wrest it from my lifeless fingers." At that moment, 2 German soldiers passed me on either side, and they approached the young boy. One of the soldiers put a blade up to the boy's neck, as an officer told the father what would happen. Fine, I will give you my land and all my acres. Please just let my son go." The officer shouted in German something that I didn't understand immediately. Not until I saw the blade pass through the child's throat, spilling his life upon the ground. The father wept, falling to his knees. "Harrison, my boy." He sobbed until he could not breathe. "Why did you kill my boy?" The officer seemingly walked through my chest and approached the father, kneeling down. "This land will belong to us, all of it, even if we must exterminate all Franks. Your son will serve as a reminder to those who question where your loyalties lie." And then one of the soldiers laid the boy down on the ground and began to carve a symbol into his forehead. And that's when I recognized the boy. The swastika showed he was the same boy that I had passed in the woods. I had found Rymoit, but now I had to find the boy in the tree. Harrison. Could they be one and the same? Once the memory had finished, the apparitions appeared to take their usual places. The boy looked at me. "Oh, you must speak with my father." I turned in and began to head towards the faint tree line to the south. Explosions rattled next to me in unnerving silence, as soldiers were blown apart or pushed up into the air, soaring over the battlefield and out of sight. I managed my way to the edge of the battlefield and crossed over into a thick fog-covered forest. After a few minutes of wandering, I began to hear the familiar sound of moaning in chains, lapping against the bark of dead trees. They were here, the warden masses, tied and bound to their eternal resting places. I searched for Harrison for what felt like days. Finally, after wandering aimlessly past tortured soul after tortured soul, I saw his frail small body. From comparison, I understood that this small boy was bound with the most effort. All the other bodies, the thousands that were writhing, the thousands that were not, most appeared to be tied up for maximum torture and damage inflicted. Harrison, on the other hand, was masterfully suspended, chains seeming to be ritual and organization, his slit throat and carved forehead being the only visible markings on his body. His head was down and his eyes closed. I walked up slowly but deliberately. Harrison Rymoit." The question went unanswered as the slain child remained motionless. Unmoved, I spoke again. "Harrison, this is your father." At a moment like this, I would have felt bad, but something was missing. It worked. The boy began to move, raising his head slowly, his sunken eyes revealing his dead pale gray eyes. "Who are you?" he moaned. "I am Peter," I said. I am here to save you, perhaps. The boy looked down, emotionless. I cannot be saved. Go and save yourself. I was sent to find you. Just then, the ground began to shake violently, causing me to fall to the ground. What was that? I asked. In unison, all the bodies, and when I say all the bodies, I mean every single one, even Harrison replied with, "The beast." And then the ground shook again. You must leave, said Harrison. I'm pretty sure I'm already dead and I'm not here by choice. If you are my only ticket out of here, I am taking you with me no matter what. Now how do I get the chains off? You can't. He keeps us here, our souls. It started with me in these woods many years ago. Those lost or killed in these woods would rise again, but would be left without their soul, which was endlessly tortured here, a true hell on earth. The resurrected felt the physical pain of their souls torture every day for forever, as their physical bodies are bestowed with eternal life. The beast, is that Satan? One of them. The Germans brought him forth and the war set him free. The bloodshed was used to bring him forward onto this earthly plane, to feast on those who would choose to sell their soul for a second chance at life, an eternal life, but one filled with much pain. An obligated pain greater than anything they had ever experienced, to keep them humble, to keep them obedient. The ground shook with the mighty shake so shocking. I planted my rear in thick mud up to my chest. Just then, a chant began to ring out through the trees. 1,000 bodies tied to trees, all alive and well. Devils came and cried disease and rang the mortal bell. More and more the bodies fell. The bloodshed stemmed the tide. Eyes and ears which couldn't quell the evil full of pride. Death, ye death, the essence of the beast. Repeat with me, repeat. 1,000 bodies tied to trees, all alive in hell. The bodies ceased their voices. At that moment, Harrison walked up behind me. Yet Harrison was still set in the tree, chained and bound, silently staring at the sky. This other Harrison was clean and tidy, standing with purpose and pose. It was the beast, and he came to bargain. You have found him again, said the beast. I told you I would, I said with a smug confidence. Indeed you did. So you wish to free him? I was sent here for him. This is not what I asked. Do you wish to free him? I looked at the real Harrison still strapped to the tree, staring off into endless nothingness. Yes. I turned and I faced the beast. Yes, I wish to free him. Fine. The beast snaps his fingers, as the real Harrison goes completely limp. There is a price for this, you know, says the beast, who snaps his fingers again. I felt the chains wrapped tightly around my body, as my perspective was one of those tied to the trees, bound and restrained. Harrison's body was limp upon the ground. You will return to your life as it was before you came here, but you will not be the same, as I am sure you know. The beast goes to snap, but before he can, I interrupt. Wait! He looks at me, and I can see the malice behind his eye for that split second. What will happen to Harrison? I ask. He will return to his father, his soul released from this eternal torment. He is no longer the beacon for those so many whose lives I've claimed on these lands. Two hells converged, spilling forth her hatred and wrath. The beast smiles. Welcome home. And he snaps his fingers. I took the biggest gulp of air that I had ever taken into my lungs in all of my life. The men around me looked on in awe. the charred remains had sprung to life. Since then, I've returned to my normal life, except some things are very apparent. The constant burning in my gut, the sharp pain in my joints, the pounding pressure inside of my skull, and the ever-repeating chant in my ear. 1,000 bodies tied to trees, all alive and well.